A good Erev Shabbos to everyone. This week, a few days ago, we lost a very special Lubavitcher Chassid, Rabbi Aryeh Lasky. I knew Aryeh during my years in the yeshiva in the 70s and 80s. Let me tell the Olam, let me tell you a little bit of his history. I'm not sure people really know about his history. Aryeh was born in Michigan, I believe in Grand Rapids, East Grand Rapids, Michigan. His parents lived there. His father was a known photographer in the city. They weren't, at the time, religious. They belonged, I believe, to a Reformed temple. And that's the way Aryeh grew up until his teenage years, 15, 16 or so, 17. Rabbi Yosef Berman, today of Boynton Beach, a 73-year-old man. I spoke to him yesterday. He told me that he met Aryeh in the conservative shul on Rosh Hashanah in the early 70s. He himself was becoming religious at the time, and this was the shul nearby. And he didn't want to go to the Reform, so he thought conservative is an upgrade, and he'd go to the conservative place. Everything was fine. Meanwhile, he sees that there's a choir goes up to the bima mixed with men and women. This he couldn't tolerate anymore, and he decided he's going to a classroom upstairs in this building, which was already an old building. They were building a new building at the time, but the services was still in the old building. He went into a classroom, and he was davening, and he was at the point of Melech Elyon in the Chazoras Hashatz, Rosh Hashanah, and he hears from another room someone not crying, but shouting and praying loud. So he thought he was the only one that escaped there. Meanwhile, he goes into another classroom and he sees this teenager, and he's praying in English at the top of his lungs, and he's totally into it. He says, "Hello, how are you?" And he talks to him for a few minutes, and he sees that this young man is very, very interested in Yiddishkeit, and he's interested in prayer. And he says to him, "You should go to Chabad. They'll feed you." And he told me yesterday, he meant they'll feed you spiritually, but it sounds good because Chabad feeds you anyway. You come, you're invited to a meal. And that's the last that he knew of him. Years later, when Aryeh would come back to his parents, to the community, he saw Yosef, because Yosef was one of the three people who helped bring Rabbi Yossi Weingarten to Grand Rapids 43 years ago. So Yosef was one of the first three Balabatim who made it happen. So when Aryeh would come back, he saw, suddenly, he has the word rabbi. He got smicha. And so he saw his development over the years. Aryeh, I knew him, was an intense person. But that intensity was with a focus. A few examples. And here we see a very important nakuda, a very important point. That intensity does not mean bad. Intensity can mean focused and fully involved. And you realize you don't have a minute to waste. Time is short. Time is moving. The clock's moving. Like I told you once, the vort of the Alter Rebbe said, Moshe repeated the name of his father. Es läuft der Zeit. Time is moving. The Alter Rebbe many times would speak with a sing-song. So anyway, Aryeh had that in him. When he was in New York, he was introduced to the Wednesday hour release time, that Bochurim students go to the public schools and take the children out, and they learn with Yiddishkeit, some Torah, etc., for an hour a week.
Aryeh was someone who was totally involved, and he developed a connection with many children.
And he had in his briefcase, he had all the paraphernalia, all the things that you needed for release time. And some friends told me when they went on release time and they didn't have the last minute, because you're in yeshiva learning. And then all of a sudden you have to go to for a few hours on Wednesday afternoon to help to teach Yiddish Kinderlach, Yiddishkeit, who are still in public school. You give them an opportunity. You need some of the, you need the siddur, the chumash, this paper, that paper. Aryeh had it all in his briefcase. So they knew if they go to Aryeh, they'll have it. His connection with the children was so much that he would take pictures of bar mitzvah boys having their aliyah in the upstairs shul in 770 with the Rebbe standing right there. The Rebbe would always get the third aliyah, and the boy would usually get the second aliyah. They would ask the kohanim to leave, I believe. Anyway, and he would take pictures. You have to understand, the room is it's not very large and it's packed. So you couldn't really shoot from the right side or left side. You had to kind of shoot right from the front of the bima, kind of the bima separating you, the bar mitzvah boy, and the Rebbe, the photographer. And Aryeh would do that. So there were many Hasidim who were bothered by it, and then they told him to stop, and they told him this is not what the Rebbe wants, and it's a disturbance. You have a camera. Although he didn't, he didn't have the flash. He was able to. There was already. You didn't need a flash, but still, it's like a camera in your face. And and after a while, he said maybe they're right. So he wrote to the Rebbe a letter, and he showed this to my friend Rabbi Baruch Hecht, the shliach in Brentwood, California, a very good friend of mine. And Baruch told me that he saw the letter. He saw the actual letter because Aryeh showed it to him. And he wrote to the Rebbe, maybe he should stop. But he also wrote that, sometimes 2-3 years later, he goes in, he's with the bar mitzvah boy as he becomes a teenager, and he keeps a connection with him. And he sees that this picture that he made of him standing next to the Rebbe getting the aliyah is prominently displayed in the boy's room. And out of all the pictures, this is the picture. Because Aryeh would blow up the picture and frame it and give it to the boy. I don't know if he framed it. I think he did. Whatever. He gave the boy the picture as a maskeres netzach, as a gift, a memory. He should have a memory of this monumental event. And the Rebbe in those days wouldn't really write back a full-page letter. He would answer and underline and make notes on your letter. And the Rebbe underlined that he should continue doing this, and that it's important, and that he can continue seeing the growth of these children, etc. Then the Rebbe just added one thing: why do you need to take a picture of me? Why must I be in the picture? Which everyone knows that's really not saying don't do it. It's an approval. The Rebbe was just making him feel good. Now you have to understand, this is a Baal Teshuvah, was a Baal Teshuvah at 16, 17, comes into Lubavitch and gets this recognition from the Rebbe, is totally involved with Wednesday hour, with release time, gets smicha in Chabad, goes from Hadar Torah, one Baal Teshuvah one yeshiva for Baal Teshuvahs in Crown Heights, where he began, to Morristown, another Baal Teshuvah yeshiva for Bali Teshuvah, and then into 770 he becomes one of the boys. I believe it was with him that he once approached the Rebbe and asked the Rebbe what name his sister should have, because she doesn't have a Jewish name. So the Rebbe asked him, what's her English name? Karen. He said Karen. So the Rebbe said, no, Karen is a good name. And the Rebbe gave him a name for his sister on the spot, Karen. He later, after he married, he moved, I don't know if right after, but he was in Los Angeles. And while my son was in the elementary school in 4th or 5th grade, he was the teacher in the 1st grade. And he was a very, very down-to-earth, very loving and practical with the children. The children really loved him. The last 20 years or so, he moved back to Michigan, to Detroit, and he was very involved in the aid of there and community things. Here is a a Yid, a Chassid. Baruch Hashem, he married, he had 9 children, has 9 children, who turned his life around because he was looking for meaning. He was looking for purpose. And he had a holy neshama. I've spoken to my friends about this. You know, there is, if you grow up frum, you grow up in Lubavitch, and you grow up in a normal, way, in a yeshiva, in a community, okay, it's expected. It wasn't expected with him. And you could see from 16, 17, when he began his tshuva, when he began his neshama, he had a very high neshama. And all of the issues that were to the right and the left, including people who bothered him, who weren't respectful, didn't matter because he stayed focused. And this Yosef Berman did a tremendous thing for him. He gave him those few words, try Chabad. And he didn't push him, and he didn't follow up. He just threw an idea into him. And this teaches us that to say to a Yid, to a youngster, try Lubavitch, try Chabad, try Rebbe, try Chassidus, try Torah. You never know what the result of those few special words will do if they're coming from the heart. Everyone knows that after a person passes away, the neshama returns on high, and we, those left behind, need to do things for that neshama if we really care about them. So one of the great things and important things is tzedakah, is helping. Someone who leaves a family of 9, although some are older, some might be married, I believe. Nevertheless, there's children, there's grandchildren, there's a wife, there's an almana. So everyone should be mishtadel to have, I think, a GoFundMe fund, charity fund they've opened, to give tzedakah, whatever you can, to support the family, and simultaneously to continue his message of Yiddish Kinder. It used to be that the Camp Gan Yisrael and the release time and the rallies was mostly for not from children, definitely not Lubavitch children. Well, things have changed, but the truth is, things have not changed. The Rebbe said, I remember at the Fabrenges, there's thousands and thousands of children that are not yet from. Rabbi Yaakov Yehuda Hecht, Rabbi J.J. Hecht would say, you want to run Ashlichas to Timbuktu, you want to run here, there, you have to go California, China, here, there. What about good old Brooklyn, which has the most amount of Jews, the New York area, and there's thousands and tens of thousands of Yiddish children that are in public school. We need to get them into a yeshiva. We need to give them exposure to Torah. That's true today as it was then. With all the yeshivas and the Talmud Torahs, it's all great. But still, trust me, in every public school, there's a lot of Yiddish kinder. So Hashem should help that in the schus of the neshama of Aryeh, Rabbi Aryeh Lasky, that we remember him as a chassid, a Yerushalayim, a lamdin, and a yid who was so dedicated to the Rebbe's inyanim, to the Eibishter, and his neshama should have an aliyah. His neshama should benefit from all the ma'asim tovim, the good deeds that we will do this year, in particular for his neshama. May we all have a gmar chasima tova, a good gebenched yor, the simcha of tuv levov, with the coming of Mashiach mamish now.